In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? I've been messing about with my Ouija board and I asked it if I was gonna get laid tonight. The pointer keeps gliding between the H and the A. It's been half an hour now. Once I was with my boyfriend and a friend of ours from college. It was the first day of winter break and we decided to drive to the coast after our friend got off work, which was later at night, and then have a bonfire on the beach and have hot cocoa because it was fucking cold. On the way back we drove through the coastal mountains, and the way we drove there weren't towns, rest stops, etc. for a good 50-mile stretch. We're driving through this stretch at about 3 a.m. and then out of the snowy frozen forest this dude covered in bandages runs out onto the road out of nowhere, and keeps running alongside the car. We're driving highway speed, so he is running fast, and it was super creepy. Then he just ducks back into the trees again and is gone. We all kind of are silent for a moment and then ask, so, you guys saw that, right? And we all had. Months later I was at a bookstore and I came across a book about local hauntings while I was waiting for my brother to finish shopping. I thumbed through it, and there was a chapter called Bandage Man about a ghostly figure who haunts that section of highway and even sometimes causes crashes. When I was 15 years old my uncle came to live with us in our basement. He parked his car in the backyard and would come home through the back door and deck where you could hear the deck make noise every time someone walked on it, so we would usually know he was home before he walked in the door from the noise on the deck. One night I was home alone, just me and my golden retriever and watching a movie. Around 11 p.m. I heard someone on the deck and assumed it was my uncle. After a few minutes he didn't come in, so I wondered what was going on and got up to check. The back deck had motion-sensitive lights and they were on, confirming my suspicions that he had been on the deck. I opened the back door and immediately my dog started growling and barking like crazy. She was completely freaked out, her hackles were raised and I had to hold her back from the door. I managed to call out for my uncle and no response. I checked the carport and his vehicle wasn't there, so I was a little creeped out by this point and locked the door and went to sleep. The next morning my uncle tells me that he came home around midnight and was not able to enter our alley to park his car in the back because of the police cars blocking our alley off. He stopped to ask them what was up and they told him that this guy had been prowling the neighborhood and sexually assaulting women and had been seen in our alley. The prowler apparently ended up a few blocks away, breaking into a woman's house, pulling her out on her front lawn and assaulting her there before he was finally caught. Pretty sure he was prowling our house before my dog scared him off. When I was a kid living in Japan, there were a lot of centipedes. The amount changed depending on the weather. One day I was walking up the hill to my house and looked in a big hole in the ground with a gate on top. And I could have sworn I saw a huge centipede dragging a small dead bird away. I only saw it for a second and to this day I'd if it actually happened. I guess that's what I see so disturbing about it. I used to work at an inn that was haunted. This particular inn was in Massachusetts and used to serve as a hospital for Revolutionary War soldiers. A couple of things happened to me while I worked there, but there was one experience that I will never forget. I used to be the first one and so that I could prepare snacks and coffee for early bird guests. It would be just me and the night audit for a couple of hours until the kitchen staff came in at 7. Anyways, one morning I was in the kitchen by myself preparing coffee. The refrigerator lights began to flicker, which in all honesty, wasn't that unexpected. I turned away from the coffee machines so that I could go get milk from the refrigerator and caught something in the corner of my eye at the dining room doors. There was a pale woman looking at me through the little windows on the door. Immediately, I turned and ran for the front desk, holding my nose as I went because it had started bleeding. There is no way it could have been a guest because the dining rooms were locked. The night audit was also African American and hadn't left the front desk. As a 16-year-old who graduated early from high school in Guatemala, I decided to enroll in a pre-med program to see what it would be like to be a doctor. As I later pieced together, the program was ran by an unofficial student group. Part of the program included going to the city morgue, which I also found out was sponsored illegally by the director of the morgue, who was taking bribes from the student group to let us in completely unattended to do whatever we wanted. Once we got there, I quickly realized this was the place where they brought the bodies of people who had died in cases that had to be investigated as potential crimes, but considering that we were at the worst possible morgue in the country, most of the crimes were pretty horrific. They gave us a decapitated guy to work with. He had also been hacked with a machete. His head was still attached to the body through a small flap of neck skin. There I also saw a dead drowned baby, which was pretty horrific on its own. The poor baby looked like the general depictions of aliens, which made me understand why we think imaginary aliens were made to look like that. The necropsy itself was pretty brutal. The older students kept making jokes about the body as they tore it to pieces, which was very unsettling. They pulled the dude's balls from his torso with some technique they had tried to master, according to them. Anyway, that night I simply couldn't sleep. I was staying with a family who I didn't know, and they had me alone in their giant house downstairs. Anyway, finally the fear kind of went away, and a few days later, while I was riding a pretty empty busway in the back, a guy who looked identical to the guy we hacked got on. He was holding a little girl who was probably 4 to 5 years old. While he was getting on, I was hoping he wouldn't sit close to me, but the dude sat right in front of me and put his daughter in the empty seat next to him. For about 5 stops, this little girl just stared at me with a blank look in her face. It was like she knew what we had done to her daddy, and she wanted to make sure I knew that she knew. As a kid, my house had a backyard patio that was elevated about 5 to 10 feet up, so you could still access my basement doors, which were right under it. I opened the patio door when I was like 6 or 7 years old and screamed out "hey" a few times. I saw a hand come up between the wooden safety rail that waved to me and quickly went back down. Quickly closed the door, put a few chairs in front of it and ran to my bed. Never went out at night again. When we were about 14, a friend and I sailed out to a small island near our camp for the night, and we kept the rain fly off so we could see the stars. Around 3 in the morning we heard a really weird noise like a chicken coming from the woods about 40 yards away, which made Abby jump on top of my chest. It then made a completely different grunting noise, and we laid down on our backs looking up, figuring an animal can't get in our tent, so let's just stay quiet. A few minutes later, a huge man leans over our tent in a Jason mask and trench coat and starts unclipping it. It's collapsing on us and we're screaming bloody murder. Tangled up in the tent, the zipper opens and Abby gets ripped out by her foot screaming, and I crawl out after them. He's chasing her around the fire and I'm chasing him. She eventually trips and he jumps right over her and runs back into the woods. We were too afraid to go through the woods to get our sailboat, so we put the tent back up and waited for daylight. When the sun came up, you could see the evidence of a scuffle, but there were no footprints around the shores of the island other than ours, and no indication that a boat had landed last night. We got the fuck out of there and haven't been back since. Scariest experience of my life, hands down. Getting married to my ex. Talk about needing an exorcism. Little late, but in college I lived in a house with 2 roommates near the edge of a not so great area. One weekend when they went out of town and I was alone, I went out to the bars and came back home and passed out. The next morning I woke up to some noise in the family room and figured I left the TV on. That's when I could actually feel people walking around. I freaked the fuck out, looked for my gun, but it was left in the living room with the intruders. I had no idea what to do, so I called the cops and for whatever reason yelled at them to get the fuck out. It scared them enough and they bailed out the back window. The creepy thing after all this was my friends' rooms had all been opened and rummaged through, and for some reason, I hope, they never opened my door. Still fucks with me till this day. Gun inside dresser now. I work at a haunted house and I showed up early. And the only person there that I could really talk to was the manager's daughter, who was already in costume. Her costume was like a dead little girl. We were the only ones who were there, with the exception of the security, that don't wear costume. She asked if I had walked through the house yet and I said no, but wanted to. So I got up and walked through and looked at all the sets. Her room is towards the end. When I got to her room, she jumped out and scared me, or so I thought. I followed her back into the scare she pops out of and she's not there. I run through the last room hoping I could catch her and she's nowhere in sight. 5 minutes later she returns from the gas station, where she bought everybody cough drops. Those things are like drugs in haunted houses. To protect your through so you can keep going. I can never walk into that room again. When I was a kid my mum was driving me to school one morning and we were stopped at the lights. Light goes green, mum doesn't move. After a second or two I tell her the light went green. She goes, "Yeah? I know, the car won't move." I could see her pressing down but the car wouldn't go. As she says that a truck flies through the intersection, nearly hitting the car in the other lane. Then my mum presses the gas again after a few seconds and mysteriously the car goes again.